The 1960s was the golden era for the American automotive industry. Car culture was at an all-time high, bigger meant better, chrome was king, and car manufacturers were in fierce competition to create the most stylish and powerful vehicles on the road. You'd see powerful muscle cars, luxury sedans that were a status symbol, and innovation at its peak. And because of that innovation, not every car from the 60s was a success. While some were timeless classics, others flopped so badly that everyone just wants them erased from history. That's right, today we're discussing the 10 terrible American vehicles from the 1960s everyone wants gone. Let's get started. 10. 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado. This was one of those cars that looked cool at first, but when you started to dive into the details, the coolness faded away. It had a few good things to gloat about, as under the hood was a 425 cubic inch fuel-injected engine that generated 385 horsepower and 474 pounds-feet of torque. But all of this just amounted to big numbers. The 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado was a behemoth of a car that weighed in at around 4,500 pounds, which made it feel slow. Apart from that, it featured a front-wheel drive system. This was a big deal back in the 60s, but it wasn't suitable for a car of this size. So what ended up happening was that it just plowed straight even when you tried to make a turn. But that's not all. This front-wheel system meant that tires would wear out pretty quickly, so the car came with a fair bit of maintenance costs. Gas prices weren't as high as they are today back in the 60s, but this car didn't care. It would bleed your wallet dry every week, and then there's the design. The 66 Toronado was supposed to be a luxury vehicle, but it was designed for anything but that. Its size made it impossible to park in somewhat regular spaces. Apart from that, the car had some really neat features for its time, like electric windows, air conditioning, pop-up headlights, and even a small TV display. But it was a tank on the road and nobody wanted to deal with it. 9. Ford Edsel 1960. With this model, Ford basically wanted to transform the entire automobile industry, but since it ended up on the list, we can assume that they didn't achieve that goal. First off, its design, mainly the horse-collared front grille, stirred up quite a controversy as it was criticized as a design failure and just looked awkward. The two-toned rear wasn't a treat to look at either, as it resembled a spacecraft that came from a poorly animated cartoon. The standard engine under the hood was a Ranger V8 that generated 185 horsepower and 292 pound-feet of torque. However, the car suffered from numerous mechanical problems that included faulty electronics and parts you just couldn't rely on. This made owning an Edsel a complete nightmare. The vehicle would frequently break down, leaving the owners dissatisfied. This not only tainted the car's reputation, but hurt sales figures so badly that if you lived during the 60s, this car would be on your not wanted list. 8. 1960 Pontiac Ventura. The 1960s was an era that had a lot of design innovation when it came to cars, and sometimes the innovation just ended up making the cars look odd. That's what happened with the 1960 Pontiac Ventura. Its design work just had a lot of extras: extra chrome, extra bodywork, oversized fenders, extra flash, and no grace at all. Pontiac planned to position the 1960 Ventura as an upscaled version of the Catalina, but as you can tell from the looks of it, the car just ended up being a shiny, bulky mess. It had a 389 cubic inch V8 under the hood that generated 283 horsepower, but despite that, its performance was nothing to gloat about. The body and size of the car were heavy, meaning that speed was compromised, and adding fuel to its fire of failures was the fact that the engine was built for comfort, not performance. So not only did it have a poor design, but it also couldn't compete with other vehicles like the Chevy Impala, which was a people-pleaser at the time. It did have some great features like power steering and power brakes, but the suspension was soft and its build quality was poor. So it basically looked and felt like someone was driving a boat on the road. 7. Subaru 360. If you think that it was only the big cars that didn't succeed back in the 60s, The next vehicle will make you question your decision. Say hello to the Subaru 360. This car was small, light, and perfect for driving around in dense cities. So, back in 1968, Malcolm Brickland, an American businessman, introduced the car to U.S. consumers. He was confident that it would be a game changer and would win over American drivers, but the reality is always different from what we plan. The average American driver was used to big cars with powerful engines, and while the Subaru 360 might have found success in countries like Japan, it fell short of American expectations. Its small design wouldn't have offered much comfort. Apart from that, it came with a small engine that only generated 25 horsepower. So this meant you couldn't really top 60 miles per hour, which would make it significantly less practical for American consumers, and within a few years, it quietly exited the market. 6. 1961 Chrysler Newport. This next car on our list was Chrysler's attempt, or failed attempt, at catering to budget-range buyers. The Chrysler Newport was kept in production for 20 years till 1981, but the model from the early 60s stood out for all the wrong reasons, and it simply didn't match what the buyers were looking for. Under the hood, the 60s Newport came with a powerful V8 engine, but it didn't do any good for the car as it featured a large boxy design with oddly tilted headlights and a fender and front grille that just looked awkward. All of this meant that the Newport was mainly too heavy in bulk, leading to poor performance and high fuel costs. The side fins on the rear, which embedded the turn signals, also didn't do any good as they made the car resemble a fictional UFO. Apart from that, Chrysler's idea here was to offer a car that was large, comfy, and low-priced. But they ended up making a poor decision that didn't match the sleek appeal competitor vehicles had to offer. But that's not all. The 1961 Newport didn't even offer buyers basic features like power windows and air conditioning. This, coupled with the poor performance, bad fuel consumption, and an odd design made the car something buyers simply did not want to spend money on. 5. 1962 Imperial Crown. Next up is another infamous innovation from Chrysler. Remember when we said that bigger meant better in the 1960s? Well, Chrysler sure took this statement to heart when they designed the 1962 Imperial Crown. From a manufacturer's perspective, the Imperial Crown was intended to be one that would compete with Lincoln and Cadillac. However, it ended up doing anything but that. It featured a large, boxy design with awkward curves that didn't do the aerodynamics any favor. Among some of its odd highlights were the huge front and rear ends, giant bumper, and tail fins. It was designed to be one of those super luxury cars, but in reality, it looked like something from a child's sketchbook. While the outside of the car was nothing more than a messy show-off attempt, it did have some great basic features like leather seats, air conditioning, and power windows. But that's about it. Despite being powered by a 413 cubic inch V8 engine that generated 340 horsepower, the size of the vehicle still made it sluggish. It came with an automatic transmission and drum brakes, but driving it was quite a challenging experience as it must have felt like battling a mammoth. So overall, its humongous size, poor design, and not so luxurious driving experience are things that made it a vehicle worth deleting from automotive history. 4. 1967 Renault. Renault was doing fairly well for themselves in the 60s and had managed to find success with features like rear-mounted engines and air conditioning being a prominent part of what they offered. But with the 1967 model, they screwed up big time and failed to meet expectations as people were left waiting for the next big thing. Buyers were offered a plethora of problems instead of an upgraded variant. This 1967 model wasn't ginormous like other failures of the 60s, but don't let that fool you. The looks were nothing to brag about. It was your below-average, four-door sedan, and looking at it would make you wonder if the manufacturers just sort of cramped the front and back onto a small frame. Apart from that, it came with a 1.1-liter engine and 4-speed manual transmission. So, a top-notch driving experience was never on the table to begin with. The 1967 Renault also became known for its poor braking and would not stop like it should. Because of this, many thought that the car was a step back rather than forward and that Renault had lost its way. 3. 1965 AMC Marlin. Next up on the worst cars of the 1960s list is the 1965 AMC Marlin, which was also known as the Rambler Marlin. Why? Because it was built on the Rambler framework. With this model, AMC's aim was to break into the personal luxury car market and compete with others like the Ford Mustang and the Chevy Corvair. As far as the design is concerned, the car featured a dual round headlight setup, and the front grille and bumper weren't anything special. This design would have been acceptable had it not been paired with the fastback roofline. From the side and back, it looked like a car that had an upside-down boat on top. But that's not all. If you're thinking that the roofline seems a bit too big for the Marlin, you're not the only one. Almost everyone, except AMC, thought the same. Instead of looking like a sports vehicle, it just had an odd shape and awkward proportions. As far as the engine is concerned, the Marlin came with an inline-6 and a V8 option. It could generate around 445 horsepower, but the driving performance was poor. Overall, the awkward design combined with poor performance meant that it fell significantly short of competing against the likes of a Mustang and just ended up being a footnote in the automotive history of the 60s. 2. 1963 Dodge Dart Phoenix. Dodge had joined the race of failing cars back in the 60s. It's hard for many people to think that a brand that produced the iconic Charger would have had such failures, but it did, and it was all thanks to the 1963 Dart Phoenix. Based on first impressions, it appeared as if the car had just tried a bit too hard to be stylish. It was introduced by Dodge as a budget-friendly sports option, but as you can tell, it failed to meet the expectations. The 1963 Dart Phoenix had a mundane and boxy shape that was accented with too much chrome. To keep it simple, it looked like someone had taken a regular sedan and made some cheesy sports modifications to it. The idea behind the car was to have it compete with successful muscle cars of the time like the Ford Mustang and the Pontiac GTO, but there was no competition. It was like a kid with a wiffle ball who was trying to get into the pro leagues. The 1963 Dodge Dart Phoenix, in terms of appearances, just lacked the edge-style muscle cars were known for. Under the hood, it had a 225 cubic inch inline-6 engine that generated 145 horsepower. Although it could be upgraded to a V8, the performance just wasn't there. No elegance, no style, and no performance are things that ultimately made it an infamous automobile failure from the 1960s. 1. 1963 Mercury Marauder. The 1963 Mercury Marauder is by far one of the most overrated and unimpressive cars from the 60s. Mercury's aim with this model was to capitalize on the muscle car trend of the era, but by looks of it, you can see that it failed to do that. Overall, the car was just too massive and too heavy. Under the hood, it packed a V8 engine that could generate up to 330 horsepower in some models. However, the sheer size and structure of the vehicle made it slower and sluggish in comparison to others like the Pontiac GTO. While the design didn't have features that infamously stood out, it still lacked the muscle car aura. As far as the driving experience goes, even with the powerful V8, its acceleration was slow and making turns felt like going to battle. That's not something you want with a car of this size and proportions. It wasn't going to make it into the garage of a muscle car lover, and its poor fuel economy kept it from being an average daily car as well. In the 1960s, car manufacturers were running wild with innovative ideas, and that's how they ended up with too much chrome, huge bumpers and tail fins, poor performance, and cars nobody wanted. Which one of these infamous design aspects do you dislike the most? Comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe.